Would you quit? We need to talk. We came out here in the 100-degree heat because a few weeks ago we posted a photo of ourselves swimming on a flooded campsite around Greer's Ferry Lake. And the joke was that Timothy was swimming around looking for the fire ring and he couldn't find it. And I said that it was unacceptable that it was this way, or unacceptable that he couldn't find the fire ring.
Joke.
Obviously, if he found the fire ring, there's nothing he could do with it anyway because it was 4 feet underwater. A lot of you understood that when it rains in the spring, we get more water in our lakes, and that's the way it is, and no one can control the weather. But there were several people who got upset with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for letting the campsites flood. People said that USACE was asleep at the switch again, someone's not letting water out, someone's not doing their job. There was a little bit of negative pushback about it. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Jay Townsend, reached out to us, and we've met with him before. We toured Orman Lock and Dam in Morrilton.
And Greer's Ferry Dam in Heber Springs.
Yeah, he was very kind. He took us on a tour so we could show all that to you so you can watch those videos as well. But he reached out and he said, hey, we think this is a great opportunity to meet together again and walk around a flooded campsite and discuss why they're flooded and the purpose of the dams. So that's what we did.
So we met here. We're at Devil's Fork Rec Area, and we met Jay today. We talked for over 2 hours and covered all kinds of neat information about the Corps, its mission, and the purpose of the lakes and the rivers and how it all works.
We filmed all of that for you. So what you are about to watch is Jay's answers to all of the questions that were submitted on Facebook.
Was that a bug?
I think it was a grande long leg. He answered all the questions. It didn't matter what it was. He was open about everything, so enjoy.
And thank you to Jay for coming.
And Aspen, we appreciate
Jay
your time.
So thank you very much for coming up to meet us and for giving us all this information. Hope you enjoy it.
I'm Jay Townsend. I'm the Chief of Public Affairs for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Little Rock District, and we manage the reservoirs on the White River Basin.
Today and for a while we've seen that these campsites have water in them and the whole lake has risen quite a bit. Why does that happen, and why is that part of the process with the lake and the dam and the river?
So we're at Greer's Ferry Lake, and Greer's Ferry Lake is part of the White River Basin. So you've got multiple high head dams that are capturing runoff from rainfall events. And this spring, we had a lot of rain. I don't know if you guys remember, but it didn't stop raining until like 2 weeks before the 4th of July. It was one rain event after another after another. And these reservoirs were all put in after a spring much like this in the 20s, where it just kept raining. And so they just had flood after flood after flood. So the federal government decided we needed to put in some flood control reservoirs to reduce the frequency and severity of the floods that would happen along the White River. So Bull Shoals, Table Rock, Greer's Ferry, Beaver, Clearwater Lake were all put in to capture rain from heavy runoff and then slowly reduce it downstream to prevent and reduce the severity of that flooding.
Okay, so to control the river on the other side of the dam, how much water is coming out and if it's flooding homes, stuff like that.
Yeah, and if you look at, you go down the White River from Beaver to Table Rock to Bull Shoals, North Fork, and Greer's Ferry, they all kind of flow into the White River near Newport and Georgetown, and those areas are the agricultural interest in eastern Arkansas. I think we discussed before, Arkansas is the #1 rice exporter in the nation. There's a lot of farmland over there, and so all these reservoirs capture the rainfall runoff, the heavy rains, and we hold it to try to reduce the amount of flooding that's happening over there. Now, even with all that flood control in place, there's still a lot of uncontrolled. So if it rains below the dams, we can't control that. And so the White River will rise on its own. What we want to do is where we can control it, hold it, and let the White River evacuate on its own. So that's naturally going to rise and flood on its own. But if we didn't have these dams in place, it'd be much higher and much more severe. And so we hold that water as long as we can. That's why you see us still holding now in July, and it hasn't rained heavily in a few weeks, because that river is still dropping on its own. If you look at the White River Basin across the top of the state of Arkansas and up into Missouri, underneath of that is the Buffalo. That's completely uncontrolled. Below Bull Shoals in North Fork, all the way down, that's all uncontrolled. And then you've got Clearwater in Missouri. On the Black River, all that below Clearwater is uncontrolled. All of that storage has to evacuate from the river itself before we really want to make any big significant releases. Let's remember though, we got a lot of rain. And there are times when these dams reach the top of their flood pool. And so we do have to make releases, but even those releases are smaller releases at the time to avoid much larger releases later.
Okay, so you can release and stop like that?
Right, we can keep it right at the top of that flood pool, and then once we start making those releases, we want to try to bring those pools down a foot to a foot and a half to try to make room for the next rain event.
So recreation, camping, boat ramp availability, all that, where does that fall on the priority list with the function of the Corps?
As Arkansans, we know recreation from these reservoirs and rivers is one of the best benefits, but we first have to look at flood control, hydropower, water supply, environmental stewardship, and then recreation. We cannot make release decisions around these reservoirs based off of recreation because we've got these other missions that we have to meet first. First off being flood control, reduce the amount of floods and the severity of what those floods would be. Then we've got to look at our hydropower and water supply missions as well. So on these hot days in the summer like this, the nation's power grid is depending on our hydropower to come online to meet that demand and go offline when that demand goes away. So if we didn't have these reservoirs and this water stored, you dial the time clock back 70 to 80 years, and there wasn't a lot of power grid around here, but where it was unstable. They had a lot of blackouts and they had a lot of brownouts. The blackouts is total loss of power, and if it's 100 degrees like it might get today, that's pretty rough. Life before conditioned air, as well as brownouts. Inconsistent power going through the grid is tough on appliances, refrigerators, microwaves, washers and dryers. It wears them out, and so blackouts and brownouts are bad, so we want to make sure we can meet the hydropower mission, drinking water. Arkansas is one of those states where people are just flocking to right now. We got a lot of new neighbors from outside places. The demand for drinking water and clean water to wash our clothes and even water our lawns, all that comes from a lot of these municipal water supply agreements that we have in Beaver, Table Rock, Bull Shoals, and Greers. And then environmental stewardship. Right now we've got these reservoirs, so now we want to keep them clean. If you look around here, you don't see, right where we are now, you don't see a lot of developed shoreline. That's on purpose. We have to protect this reservoir. We need to protect it to be able to meet the flood control mission. So for example, we need more trees. Trees drink water, and so in these heavy spring events, we need as many trees around the reservoirs as possible to help soak up some of that water, and it slows the runoff into the reservoirs. We need trees. We need a vegetative buffer around the reservoir to help with flood control. We need a vegetative buffer around the reservoir to help with hydropower because we need clean water to run through the turbines. I took you guys through the dam. If we had dirty, nasty water, it's going to...
Constantly having to clean it out.
That's right. That nasty water going through those turbines and through the penstocks, that big giant shaft that I showed you guys, it just wears that stuff out a whole lot faster, and then we're dumping dirty water downriver, and that's not what we need in those artificial trout fisheries that are down there. Drinking water as well. Sorry, go ahead.
Is that the red line you're referring to, as far as everybody talks about the white line, red line?
Yeah, it's where the federal government bought land in order to operate these reservoirs to meet these missions.
That protective barrier around there.
We like to call it a vegetative buffer or a protective buffer. We need that. You see a lot of lakes where they've somehow lost control of the shoreline, or it's not part of their mission sets.
Lake Hamilton is that way. Developed.
Yeah, it's a power lake. It's got one mission, and so they don't require as much of a vegetative buffer as we do. But we need to protect this resource, and then think drinking water. We've got a lot of municipalities that draw water from these reservoirs, and it doesn't take a whole lot to take water from Greers Ferry and get it to your tap. But if this reservoir gets dirty and the water quality degrades, then your water bill is going to go up over time. The treatment has to go up.
That's interesting because we always thought it was mostly aesthetic. Right? No one can clear and build because it looks way prettier and more natural. We didn't realize that the vegetation, as far as especially soaking up the water, I never thought about it controlling the water level.
Yeah. If
it's all using the water, then it helps it to stay lower as well. The white line, is it a certain amount of feet from a certain point, or how's that measured?
Yeah, so it's a real estate fee line, basically. So when the engineers designed the reservoirs, they looked at how high we thought it could get, and so they bought in fee this land to own and operate the reservoir. And then there's some land beyond that called flowage easement as well, where we know if we get super high we can get into, and so we want to protect that area as well. I want to go back to the purpose of the trees too. Okay. Each one of these trees is a giant drinking straw. So especially in times of high water like this, we need each of them here to take as much of that water as well, because it pulls the water out of the flood control pool. And then these trees are also holding the shoreline together. So you have people that sometimes they'll clear cut all the way down to the reservoir, and they'll call us, you know, a couple of years later and say, we've got an erosion problem because of you, you know, because the reservoir goes up and down, and we'll go out and look, and we're like, no, you've got an erosion problem because of you. You took down all of the stabilization, all the root systems that were holding that together. And so while you want a beautiful view of Greers Ferry Lake or Bull Shoals or North Fork, name one, those trees are serving a purpose. We really need them here.
Is it true that if someone does cut trees below that line that they then have to pay a fine? Is that what's happening with the homeowners?
Yeah, so there's timber trespasses and there's encroachments. So cutting down trees on federal property or putting a shed or part of your house on federal property is encroachment or a trespass. And so there are fines associated with those. And we're going to do our best to find ways to have you move that stuff out of there, because these lands were purchased to operate this reservoir.
Right, so they own up to that point, they do not own that property.
Right, that's federal property, and we're pretty good neighbors. I know some folks might disagree, but if you and I were neighbors and I walked over to your house and I built a shed there, you're not going to let me keep it.
Or if you cut down all my trees.
Or if I come over and I cut down all your trees because your leaves are falling into my pool or something, we're not going to be good neighbors. Right. And so, you know, and folks say, well, can you at least clean up the shoreline? We want it like this. We want the trees, we want the underbrush, we want the button brush and other things that are growing there to help hold that shoreline together and slow down that erosion. Just call the local project office. You can get permits for stuff like that. If there's dead trees or fire risks or other things, reach out to the project office. We're, like I said, I promise we are good neighbors. They'll come out and evaluate the situation and figure out the best course forward.
So basically, don't do it yourself, but you can call and ask for it to be looked at.
Reach out.
Okay.
First of all, these people that work around these reservoirs with the Corps of Engineers, the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, USGS, National Weather Service, none of us take any joy in having to close a campground, right? But if we moved every campground way up out of the flood pool, a few years later or even weeks, we'd get phone calls later saying, hey, we'd much rather camp down there by the water. Yeah. And so that's why these campsites are here. People really want to be near the water so they can enjoy it. But when the water levels rise and it starts to get up into the campgrounds, we start making those preparations. We have to start canceling people's reservations. And then our park rangers will come out and talk with folks. We'll have maintenance crews come out and try to remove as much as we can, especially electrical, out of the pedestals, decharge those lines, and prepare the campsites to be underwater for quite some time. Because we do truly want to slowly release this water downstream, so we're not going to be able to drop it 10 feet in 10 days. That could induce flooding downstream, so the reservoir is going to go down now. I believe I looked right before we came out here. Even as it stands, we're 6 feet high in Greers Ferry, but the empty date to where we get back down to Topper Conservation Pool is around September 15th.
Wow. So
those 6 feet, it's going to take us a whole nother month to bring down, and that's if we don't get any more rain. That date, that target back to conservation pool changes every time we get more rain. Now, we don't have a lot of rain in the forecast, but I think we've all seen these severe storms pop up recently in different areas here in Arkansas and around the country that have the potential to dump a lot of water. And if that happens and we're able to capture it here in the reservoir, that's better for the downstream conditions, because in that area in eastern Arkansas that we talked about where those farmers are, you know, we've got to be getting crops in the fields. And so as that water's gone down, they've been able to farm closer and closer to the water's edge.
I'm glad these sites are where they are, because we do like to be by the water, and we've been at Old Highway 25, for example, when the lake is low, like the lowest I've seen it, and you are walking maybe 40, 50 yards to get to the water's edge to swim. And so if it wasn't that way, when the water was at the proper level, yeah, you'd be way far away from it.
Yeah, it's like going to the beach with your kids, and if you don't get the beachfront condo or hotel and you're across the street, your trek from dragging your wagon from there all the way down to the beach, by the time you get there, the kids are ready to go because it's 100 degrees. I don't make enough money to buy to get the beachfront property. I'm a few blocks back.
We've taken our kayaks a long distance when the lake's low, so yeah, it is nice when it's at normal pool that the campsites that are close there give you access for swimming, kayaking, fishing, whatever.
What you need is the downstream channel capacity. And so there's some gauges downstream at like Newport and Georgetown that we look at, and we would rather the White River be at 14 feet at Newport on its own so that we can make releases. And if it gets above 14, then we're going to hold back our releases. But you know, above, if we can keep the White River at 14 feet, farmers can get crops in the field. And that's really the goal on that end of the basin and how we manage it. You know, it takes days and days for the water to get from here to the Mississippi, and it, you know, through evaporation, through irrigation, through different things, that water, you know, can kind of deplete down. So we are monitoring all of that. We're monitoring the water as it flows out of the White River Basin, as it merges with the Arkansas and goes into the Mississippi, but we're not regulating to what's in the Mississippi.
Right.
They're going to take it, right? The Mississippi can handle the water coming from the White River Basin. But in order to protect that downstream agricultural interest in eastern Arkansas, we're going to look at those gauges at Newport and Georgetown and other places. Okay. The White River Basin is Beaver, Table Rock, Bull Shoals, the Buffalo, every river that flows into any of these reservoirs. It flows towards the main stem of the White River in eastern Arkansas, and that's where you've got these farmers trying to farm as much land as they possibly can.
Right, so even out there in the far eastern, they're affected by how decisions are made over here.
Yeah, they're affected by how decisions are made at Beaver. But we're making these flood risk reduction decisions based off of the White River Water Control Plan and not recreation. You know, recreation is, like I said earlier, we're not allowed to make release decisions based off of recreation.
So it sounds like you've got farmers and fishermen with trout on the Red River and campers and boaters all vying for what they want at the same time.
And then you've got private landowners. You've got all types of interest groups and stakeholders. You've got the power companies. They love high water sometimes because there's a lot of power generation from it. You've got the environmental piece. There's so many competing interests for this water, but we've got a pretty balanced water control plan, flood control being the first priority, and those others, you know, come in lower. But here's the way I see it, you know, if campers and everybody else can understand the plan, you can manage your expectations better. So if you reserve a campsite right here on the edge because you want it right near the water, but we have a really wet spring or winter, whenever your camp reservation is, just know it might get canceled.
Yeah, everybody has different opinions, but there is a priority level and decisions being made based on those priorities.
Yeah, and like I said, we take no joy in canceling someone's campground reservation. Yeah. Our park rangers go to school for natural resources and camping and these other programs. Like this is the pinnacle of their season. They want it to be successful. Yeah. And so, you know, closing it's not something we enjoy. Right. We want to see that. We want to see that all summer long. People having a good time, wearing life jackets while they're out there tubing. We want to see the campsites in the parks. We like walking through here and seeing people that have come back for their 15th year in a row. Something else I want to talk about too is when the water levels are high, there is a lot more water to play on, but it also brings dangers with it. And so, you know, you guys were swimming out by a picnic table and all. It was a joke, and it was funny to us too. We can take a joke, and some people took it really serious because unfortunately their reservations were canceled. And like I said, we take no joy in that, but when the water levels get high, we have to keep campers and visitors safe. Now, along with that is, we saw some questions on your page about, what was it, swimming?
Swimming.
Wanting us to mark picnic tables,
so
and
you don't hit them if you're swimming in a flooded campsite.
Yeah, and I get that, but here's where I'd rather tell you that just don't swim there, because there are underwater obstructions, there are picnic tables, there are things that could hook on to you or grab you, and so we'd rather you stick to the designated swim beaches versus trying to swim in a flooded campground. Because we'd hate for you to hit your head underwater on a picnic table or something like that.
Get trapped under something.
Get trapped. And with this high water also too, there's a lot more water for boating, but we'd really like to ask boaters to stay in the main channels of the rivers and further away, because you will have folks out there swimming near maybe a flooded campground or picnic area, and then all of a sudden you got a boat coming through there or a jet ski. And we want folks to have so much fun while they're out here. They're planning their next trip before they ever leave. And when you have scary situations where your kids are out there swimming and almost get hit by a jet ski, it's a dangerous situation we don't want to see. So we'd like folks, even though the water's high, to stay in those main channels and, you know, boat safely. And then we would really prefer folks swim in those designated swimming areas, but it's
So those are monitored for what's in there.
right. But the lake is way too big for us to patrol and keep that from happening. And then there's way too many picnic tables, way too many lantern poles, way too many fire rings for us to mark every single one of them every time the water comes up. So to keep yourself safe, go to those designated swim areas. All of these White River Basin lakes have a master plan and a shoreline management plan and a flood control plan. None of this is done, you know, growing up in the Ozarks, you know, the neighbor might call it willy-nilly. It's not. It's all very strategically planned. There's land set aside around this reservoir for limited development, for, you know, let's just call it marina development or high use development areas. There's cultural resources around this place that we would never allow development on. There's environmental land set aside for the hunters and just certain areas all around the lake. And so you look at a lake like Greer's Ferry and you decide how much development you want to allow. More development is going to bring more people in, and when more people can be a bit of a dangerous situation. So beaver's gotten so full on like say a holiday weekend with boats. During the master plan and shoreline management process, we decided we'd reached capacity for the number of boat slips and boat docks. So there's no more boat slips or boat docks allowed on Beaver Lake because it can be too busy for the size of the lake itself on a holiday weekend. We're not there with Greer's, we're not there with Bull Shoals or North Fork yet, but depending on how much development is allowed to happen, we'll get there one day. Yeah. And one of the things we hear the most is we don't want these reservoirs to get there. These are beautiful, scenic Ozark Mountain reservoirs, and we don't want them to get so overcrowded and overpopulated that you've got to start putting in restrictions like that. But somebody might buy a piece of property thinking they're going to be able to put a boat dock in, but they've got to meet the criteria in the master plan and the shoreline management plan as well. And so before you buy property, it's always best, first of all, get a survey. Know where your property ends and the government property starts, and then go talk to the project office. Find out if that is a low density, high density, environmental area or a culturally resourced area. Is a boat dock even allowed there? In some cases it wouldn't be. Each of the reservoirs has a different length from your property to the shoreline that would allow you to have a boat dock or not. In some places it might be 100 feet, some places it might be 200 feet or 300 feet. But what we don't want is someone buying a piece of property a quarter mile away and then being able to blaze a trail from their house all the way down to the lake, because that's just going to degrade that shoreline that we're trying to protect. And so we want from your property to the lake's edge to be that known distance of 100, 200, 300 feet, depending on which lake you're on, before we would allow you to have that boat dock.
Now, what'd you say, cultural what?
Cultural resources.
What would that be?
Native American remains, historical sites, known historical sites like that.
Off for that.
Right. And we don't release, you know, the locations for all those. Unfortunately, we do have people that will come out to these lakes and try to dig up pottery and arrowheads, and that's not allowed as well.
Chain down. There we go.
So I know I said that, you know, flood control is primary mission, hydropower, water supply, and environmental stewardship are all there, and we can't make decisions based off of recreation. That is how it works, but I want folks to know that recreation is still a mission, and we do take it seriously. Oftentimes people ask us, why does the Army have a recreation mission? Why does the Army use the Corps of Engineers to execute that recreation mission? And it's because we know the benefit of having healthy Americans. We need low-cost, affordable recreation opportunities for Americans to be able to go outside, be healthy, get away from screens. You know, and even before cell phones, we knew how important it was for folks to get out of the cities and come out here and enjoy a day or 2 or 3 by the lakes. Folks used to get tents and come out here with coolers for 2 weeks at a time. You don't see that much anymore. You see a camper pull in for the weekend and then pull right back out. But we know Americans are healthier when we're taking advantage of our outdoor recreation activities. And so we still want to provide that low-cost, affordable outlet for them to do that.
Our family takes advantage of that all the time. We spend several months of the year up here and all around Arkansas at the core sites, and we really enjoy it.
Yeah, we like following you guys on social media and seeing where you're at and seeing that you're a lot of core campgrounds or state campgrounds. It really doesn't matter. It's just being outside, being away from the screens, and how important that is for us as Americans.
It's good for everyone, yeah.
All right, the Q&A session. I'm ready.
Okay.
I looked at your Facebook.
There's a lot of interest. I think we counted 192 comments that came through. I'm not going to ask you 192 questions.
All right.
We'll pick some. But yeah, a lot of interest when we said that we're going to be talking to Jay and what kind of questions do you want the Corps to answer. And so let's see, right here we've got Brent. I'm curious if there really has been an actual change in the policy Army Corps of Engineers has followed over the past 20 years, and does it include accepting higher seasonal water levels for longer duration and less emphasis on maximizing power production and returns from generation? I think we assume there is some written document that contains details reflecting how the Corps has set its priorities and methods to achieve those, and if those have been altered resulting in more years of extended high water. It might at least help us as recreational users of these waters to more clearly understand the why of the decisions leading to these conditions if we could see the plan being used to accomplish it in the form of a written policy. If it is not just our flawed perception that higher and longer extended water levels are the new norm, then what is the cause of its change in policy or other factors outside the control of the Corps? Thanks for addressing this issue. That's a lot.
Okay, so let me shorten it down to what the real answer is. And we've had more rain. We've just had more rain. And what he's looking for is a water control plan. And there's a USACE water data page. I'm going to give you guys the link for that, where you can go and find the water control plans. You can see, it's a really neat new graph as well. You can see how much water is coming into the reservoir and how much is going out. But to boil it all back down to what people think has changed, or that we're holding more water longer for any purpose, we're not. The water control plan has only changed what I recall as twice in, let's just say, the last 20 years, and that was the introduction of White River minimum flows for the trout fisheries below Bull Shoals and North Fork. And then there was the beaver interim risk reduction measures, and that's because we had high water year after high water year after high water year, keeping Beaver Lake high for so long. We don't think that's healthy on a 50 to 60-year-old dam, and so we came up with some ways to get some water out of there faster with like double firm power releases, meaning we can generate more hydropower when the pool's high and there's not as much channel capacity downstream as there would have been without it. So there's just been those two minor changes to it. Now, backing up to it, we've just had really excessive rainfall years, 2008, 2011, 2015, 2019, where we've got high pools into mid-July and that may not be empty until September. This was like one of the, maybe I think some were saying the third or fourth wettest spring we've had in recent years. I don't doubt it, because it rained and rained and rained and rained. And when it quits, people forget that it just rained for 3 or 4 months. But the evidence and proof is right here. And true flood control is slowly letting this water out of this reservoir.
So long after the rain has stopped, you're still going to see the effects for a while.
Right, but I know what they're after. I get that question often. Sometimes it takes a full explanation of what you guys are doing out here today. So I really, truly hope it helps. But we've had some really, really wet years. Now, these last 2 summers were less than average rainfall years. And so people were like, whatever the Corps is doing this year seems to work better than what they've done in the past. And the fact is, it didn't rain as much. And so we weren't impacted. We had banner recreation years where marinas and rec seasons were just gangbusters because we didn't have the rain. But we always have to remember it's a flood risk reduction reservoir, and there's going to be those seasons where it can happen.
Okay, and we'll put a link in the comments to the information that he's referring to.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so I'm just going to isolate everything that comes into Greer's Ferry for you.
Okay.
People are like, how hard is it to operate Greer's Ferry or the White River Basin? So the first one I'll show you, this is the USGS streamer. I'm going to put a pin drop on here, and it's going to show you every bit of runoff that comes into the reservoir. So this is USGS streamer. I'm going to put a pin drop right here at the dam, and it's going to show us all, with that red line right there, all the water that's running into Greer's Ferry from right there.
Wow.
And so we can also get some details on this. I've just zoomed all the way out. But again, here, this is what's showing you there. And then I'm going to click this and see if we can get this trace summary to come up. So that's 353 river miles.
That's draining?
Draining right to that central point at the dam there. And then someone asked about square miles on your page. I don't have exactly square miles of everything coming into the basin, but I'm just going to point this pin drop to Newport right here, that gauge I was telling you about, and show you everything that's draining down to Newport.
Wow.
Most of that is uncontrolled runoff and not behind any of our dams.
Wow.
And so that is stemming all the way up into Missouri, all the way over to the Kings River near Beaver Lake. And then let's just click on this and get the data and look at this trace summary. And that's 5,000 miles of stream and river dumping down to that gauge that we look at Newport.
Before the dam.
Well, Newport's after the dams,
After the dam,
but
okay.
Newport's the regulating stage for the
Okay.
White River that we talked about.
Okay.
And so how hard is it to manage? Very hard, very hard. About 51 to 55% of the basin is uncontrolled, and we've got to let all that uncontrolled runoff go before we can start getting water out of Greer's Ferry, Table Rock, Bull Shoals, and Beaver. And so I hope you guys go home and Google USGS streamer and play with that. You know, a really ridiculous one is if I were to come down here to the Arkansas River, how hard is it to manage the Arkansas River? So you guys come back and do another video based off of this click right here. So I put the pin drop at the bottom of the Arkansas River. How hard is it to manage the Arkansas River down to where it meets the Mississippi? Well, look how far the Arkansas River basin is. It goes all the way into Colorado.
Wow.
And we're capturing
Royal Gorge up there,
yeah,
runs through there, yeah.
we're capturing all the runoff. Some in Colorado, snowpack. Now we don't really feel that in Arkansas, but that water does come down. You know, a piece of melted snow has the chance to make it into the Arkansas and all the way to the Mississippi. So there was a question on your page about how many square miles. Maybe one of our engineers has that, but I think it's more important to tell you the miles of river, because that's where the runoff comes into. And so when I talk about vegetative buffer here, we need vegetative buffer around those rivers as well, because we need those thirsty trees drinking up as much of that water as possible to help avoid some of the flooding.
So without that vegetative buffer, the rise on the river and the lake would just be that much more intense.
We did a flood study for the Illinois River that flows from northwest Arkansas into Oklahoma, and a lot of people there wanted to just dredge the river. And then we found, I believe, that if they would have dredged there, they were so close to the water table, they would have made the flooding worse. Well, then we went out and looked at the amount of trees and the amount of development that's happened, and a lot of the farmers had taken all the trees out. And so they were having more severe river flooding. And the answer was, the engineered answer was, you need more trees.
Our next question is from Paul. Actually, the Corps has changed how they operate. The dams were originally built for flood control. They used to draw the lakes down starting in November, which flooded the bottomland, contributing to better waterfowl hunting. Then the spring rains would replenish the lakes with minimal flooding. However, in the 90s, we had a few dry springs, leaving the lakes lower than people liked for recreation. The Corps then changed to where the lakes were held at higher levels during the winter. The result was less water for waterfowl and lake levels being higher, leading to flooding of the lakes in wetter years. Also, thousands of acres of low farmland is no longer available due to higher water into summer, preventing planting and a large hardwood tree loss from trees dying, being under the water at the wrong time of the year. Is there any truth to that? Oh, no, maybe that's what you said. Never mind. Is there any truth to that?
That was a long
There's a lot of
statement.
stuff, I know.
So there may be some truths or half-truths in there, but I want to circle back to this too. It's all rainfall dependent. We have not changed the mission from flood control to anything else. We have the historical data that it depends on whether we had a lot of rain. We've had some really dry winters where the reservoirs have come down, and then we had a wet spring, and it seemed like we had positioned ourselves for all that water, but it was simply because we didn't have the rains in the fall and over the winter time. We have not changed the mission. We've got the historical data for that. And then when a lot of people talk about thousands of acres of farmland that they can't farm anymore, the farming is absolutely important, but the closer you farm to the river, the more of a risk you're running. And you know, once we introduced flood control, farmers were able to farm closer down to the river. But then you have a flood year, and that farmland is not available. And so it's a give and take all the time. But again, his answer boils back down to, did we have the rains or not at those times of the years? But no, we don't do a winter drawdown, never did do a winter drawdown of the lakes to try to poise ourselves. Like we didn't try to come down 5 or 6 feet on purpose so we could capture spring rains. That just was not the plan. We have a conservation pool designed for all times of the year, and we try to keep the pool levels there.
So yeah, the perception of what they're seeing, and they're assuming things that aren't always.
It's funny how we just don't remember the weather. So many people have forgotten
And the delay, like you said, the delay. Just because it's not rained in a month doesn't mean we're not still reacting to that rain that happened.
That's right. I mean, some people have already forgotten. They're like, why is the swim beach still closed? We had one of the wettest records, one of the wettest springs on record this year. That's why. We've forgotten 6 weeks ago. We've forgotten 5 weeks ago.
2 or 3 dry weeks and think it's over.
Yeah. Or they're not from here. Let's just say we get visitors from all over the place, and they'll come down here and be like, "Oh, our experience is ruined because of the Corps' mismanagement." We just had a lot of rain.
Yeah.
You know, it goes back to the point that I made, that question right there. When they designed and built these dams, we called it flood control. With the data and information we know now, it's more flood risk reduction. We're trying to reduce the severity and frequency of floods. And so I don't know all the nuances in there. I can't read into some of the tone and some of the other things, but we're trying to reduce the severity and frequency of flooding. And we know we've achieved that, but it doesn't always benefit each different stakeholder or user group the exact same or the way they would want it to. Recreation users right now can't have that site right there. Water's been high for farmers all spring long. But if we hadn't, we would have had if we didn't have the flood control, we would have had a very, very severe flood this spring. And if we hadn't developed as far as we have now, there could have been loss of life, there would have been loss of property. We stop floods all the time, and people don't even notice. You know, you get, let's just say that the reservoirs are at conservation pool, and we get one of those 4 to 6 inches of rain centralized over the reservoir. It comes up 2 or 3 feet. There's channel capacity downstream already, and so we're able to just hold it for a minimal amount of time and then let it out, and no one even knows. But what that would have been was a flash flood. And that term has gotten really scary in the last couple of weeks because of what happened down in Texas. But we prevent a lot of that. That's what these river systems, the Little Red, the White, the Kings, all of them looked like in the 20s. Before the dams were built, they were just flashy rivers. Go watch the video in the visitor center here at Greers Ferry, or that's the, what is that, the Saga of the Little Red, and then there's the La Riviera Blanche, which is the White River story. These storms in the 20s were much like the one they experienced down there in Texas, 7 inches of rain in 2 hours. You're not going to stop flooding. So flood control was a bit of a misnomer when they first started using that term. Now we look at it as flood risk reduction. We're going to try to reduce, we're going to reduce the ones we can and the severity of it when we can, but every now and then you're going to have a storm like that. Hurricane Harvey was 60 inches of rain in 48 hours. There's nothing we're going to be able to build big enough and put in place. And if we built all these reservoirs 5 times bigger, at what cost, right? Then we might go into 20 years of dry and everyone's going to question the federal government spending that money. And so you can always build it bigger, but is it worth the cost? You build them the size they are because they're engineered that way, and you reduce what you can. Beaver's authorizing purposes were flood control and drinking water.
Okay.
You add in hydropower to raise the benefit to cost ratio to really make it worth it. You add in environmental stewardship later to really make it worth it. You add recreation in later to really make the benefit to cost ratio worth it. Was it really worth the cost of building the dam, or is it really worth it? Okay. It's also important to know that Beaver Lake was designed as supplemental flood storage for Table Rock. People always ask, why does Table Rock lower first? Beaver's additional storage for Table Rock. Now, nobody in Northwest Arkansas likes to hear that, and I understand that. But in order to meet the benefit to cost ratio to build Beaver, they were simultaneously building Beaver Water District's intake structures to pull water out of there because Northwest Arkansas apparently was destined to grow with the
drinking water.
Yeah, and so you needed the drinking water and the water resource infrastructure there for that growth. You wouldn't have some of these large industries like you do now if they didn't have that reservoir there. Look back and remember in the 20s and into the 1800s what this region looked like. This was where the hillbillies and the bald knobbers and some really harsh conditions. People couldn't survive here. This is where gangs went to hide out. Jesse James and all those guys, all the outlaws, hid out in the hills. But we didn't have the water resource infrastructure for populations to grow like they have now. Insert these water resources and look at us 70 years later. Look what we've got. Thriving Northwest Arkansas, that Branson tourism area that's exploded. And you do have more stable farming. Some people may not think so, but you don't have as flashy of river systems as we once did. You've got flood risk reduction in there now. The upper stem of the White River there, you've got Bull Shoals, then Table Rock, then Beaver. Beaver's the first to fill and last to empty. You got to realize if you take water from Beaver Lake, you can't put it back. You can't put it back in Beaver Lake. And so once it fills, it's got to hold until we're able to bring the other reservoirs down. Now, Beaver was built as supplemental storage for Table Rock. Now, you look at Table Rock and you're like, well, that's crazy because Table Rock has more surface elevation than Beaver does. It looks like it's got more water storage than Beaver does. It does, but that additional surface acres and runoff into Table Rock allows it to fill much faster. So a 4-inch storm that hits Beaver and then hits Table Rock is going to fill Table Rock up faster because there's more runoff into it. Use that USGS streamer app I showed you guys. Look how much more water is running into Table Rock than is running into Beaver. And so Table Rock can fill up more from that 4-inch storm than Beaver did.
Craig says, with an understanding of the current priority listing of recreation versus flood control, what's the best avenue to express a desire for change, i.e. we are seeing consistently higher lake levels and Bull Shoals flooding recreation infrastructure. How can change happen to maybe reduce some of that infrastructure? What is the process to express that or talk to someone?
There's a couple of things going on here. Corps of Engineers recreation budgets have been flatlining and declining for a couple of decades now. So that what people are talking about is change. We want more high water ramps. Well, that costs money. We want parks moved further up away from the water. Well, that costs money. And so recreation is one of those things, you know, our federal government has to rack and stack priorities on where they're going to spend money. And so if we could ever get some more funds for recreation, I'm not trying to say we don't get enough money, because I feel like our legislators do a wonderful job of supporting us. But if we ever get more funding, then we can make those changes. That's bottom line of what that is. With flatlining and declining recreation budgets over the years, it's become very challenging. And then when you're trying to recover from a flood year like this, there's not going to be any money anywhere to make changes like that. Now, changes to a water control plan. There is a study that has been started. It's called the White River Basin Study. It also requires additional funding to keep going, but it's a study at the comprehensive use of all the ways we use water in the White River Basin, from flood control, hydropower, drinking water, irrigation, for hunting, for fishing, for recreation. It needs to look at all of those purposes. These dams were built after the floods in the 20s to meet those specific purposes and missions. Is that still what we need today? So do we need to shift our priorities and change things? That's what the White River Basin Study is. And so you can go online and you can look up White River Basin Study and see what it is. It requires additional funding that we don't have yet to continue to move forward. So it really depends on, are we receiving the funds we need to make the changes this gentleman's looking at? Are we receiving the funds we need to study the problem, to look at the things he's wanting to? And again, our legislators do a fantastic job of spreading the money out across the federal government to try to prevent failure in areas. That's a challenge they have to tackle. We're going to take whatever they give us and do the absolute best we can. It goes straight back to the U.S. Treasury. We don't keep it here to continue the upkeep here. We get an allocated amount of money each year for operation and maintenance of Greer's Ferry or Table Rock or a pool on the Mcarns. There is some legislation out there called, I think it's called the Lakes Act, where it's looking at the idea of bringing 80% of the fees collected at the campgrounds back to them. But we don't have implementation guidance on what that looks like yet. We're hoping that that 80% comes straight back, and that's on top of what we already get, not a reduction into what we're getting, so that Congress doesn't have to keep funding it. So we don't have implementation guidance on what that looks like yet, but it is out there. So this gentleman may see some change if that is an actual benefit. If we received 80% of all the collections on top of the baseline that we're already getting now, that would be huge for us. We might actually have enough rangers to patrol the parks. You know, some of these are scary situations, these parks that are way out in the middle of nowhere, and you got one ranger to go out there and respond to something.
We've seen where one ranger covers several parks because they're so short-staffed.
Yeah, you know, you send one ranger out at 11 o'clock at night to a dispute in a campsite that's all the way on the other end of the lake that doesn't have cell service. So there's a lot of things we would like to address, but I promise we're doing the absolute best with what we've got, what we're given. And again, those legislators are doing a fantastic job of providing that for us. But people want more. Yeah. People want more, and we're
Yeah.
We're at capacity on what we can give.
Right, at this point, yeah.
Even this summer, there's a hiring freeze. And so the rangers here at Greers Ferry said, we're not shutting those parks down. We're going to commit to working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep these parks open. Man, I told you, these guys go to school. They're professional park rangers. It's what they do. So they said, we're not closing these parks down. We're just going to figure it out, and we're going to work through the summertime. And so, and I want to go back and say this too. You know, these Corps of Engineers employees, these park rangers, in the 12 hours a day that they got off, they're still Sunday school coaches and T-ball coaches and excellent members of society. And so, you know, while we're feeling a little bit of pain right now, we're making it work. We're doing the best we can, and our lawmakers are up there fighting for us, and we're thankful for that.
John wanted to know about multiple campsites that were started at Devil's Fork, which is where we're sitting, that weren't finished. Wonders why. I'm sure it's the same thing. I'm sure maybe there's funding issues that was slowing that down.
You start a project, and then maybe the delayed resignation program was offered, and we took a big hit here in the Little Rock District. A lot of our employees opted to leave and take that early retirement. You got the hiring freeze. We don't have summer rangers this summer here at Greers Ferry. We would normally bring on, I'm just ballparking this one, maybe 20 to work the rec area here. We don't have that. So we've got our base number of rangers that are out here, and so all that extra work had to stop, and we had to focus our priorities on trying to make sure when you come here, you have a good experience.
Deanne is asking about the upkeep of the grounds and grants for that. Still, I think it's the same thing of the same money is being used, right? Part of that's being used for the upkeep and maintenance, and that's probably also a priority thing and what's coming in.
Things happen too. You start the rec season and you've got a contractor in place to mow or to take care of the bathrooms, and something happens and they leave, or they're unable to meet their commitments. And the next thing you know, you've got an already depleted staff of rangers out here trying to get as far as we can with some weed eating. And again, it's 110 degrees, and some people just don't care. Like, I showed up and the weeds were tall. I apologize, but if a contractor fails and we don't have them anymore, or a park attendant,
it may take a while to get the next person lined up.
That's right. It takes a while to get another contract in place, or if a park attendant starts with us and then we realize they're a problem, and so we have to have them leave. We don't have someone here doing that work, so then we got to get a ranger out here to do it. Those are some of the challenges that we are facing. I wish it was a perfect situation every time. We didn't have that, but it happens. It's happened here at Greers, where we lost cleaning contracts, and so we had to figure out how to keep bathrooms clean. And then somebody shows up to a dirty bathroom, and we start getting the phone calls. We truly regret that.
Hopefully
we truly regret that. That's it. And then somebody asked about grants on there too. And I was talking to our natural resource managers about that, and there may be times when we're allowed to do grants. We just don't know. But also, how does it look when the federal government says, here's pots of money for grants for Americans to use and thrive, but the federal government then goes in and sweeps up all those grants and takes it for ourselves? So it doesn't work that way. Those grants, it would be great if somebody wanted to go get a grant and they volunteered to clean up all of our parks with their grant money.
So,
you know,
you who complain, you can do that.
Well, I don't know if there's a grant for that, but I get what they're saying. But it goes straight back to that funding question. We did a Facebook post one time several years ago about this is why we can't have nice things. And we drove around and we found everything that folks had just gone out and destroyed, or like, does that pedestal right there really need all these holes in it? You know, I can't tell if that from 22 bullets or what is that? I don't know. Probably not. Probably not. I hope not. But all the stop signs had been shot up. All the toilets had been broken.
We noticed places are having to put in steel toilets, but people break them and break the porcelain sinks. And
it's the folks that come out and destroy things. It's why we can't have nice things.
Yep.
Can I talk about trash?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we offer some trash receptacles at some of these places, but one of the biggest things we fight out here is all the house trash and local trash that is brought in. There's a question that you guys got about some old roads on Bull Shoals, maybe Norfolk, that we had to close off access to, that people couldn't get to. And we have pictures. They were dumping cars, washing machines, hot water heaters. I mean, the amount of trash that was going in back there, and then the amount of people that would come in on side-by-sides or four-wheelers and get off those main roads and create new roads and new trails, it got to be too much. And so we had to put in some barriers. Those areas aren't closed. People can still use foot traffic and go in there, but we're not allowing folks to drive in there because, I mean, whole dump trucks were being dumped out there. It goes back to the funding piece. We were having to use the federal funding that we were getting to maintain the reservoirs and the parks to actually go clean up that trash. So again, this is why we can't have nice things sometimes, because the dumping just got to be so bad. And then, you know, folks out here, they'll come and they'll just, anything that they can throw away, or they'll bring trash from their home and they'll throw it in the receptacle when they show up. And so trash cans are overflowing. We get phone calls. I can't believe you let the trash get that high. Someone likely drove in overnight and filled the whole thing up. We've had to remove dumpsters from some places because that would happen. We'd go in, put 2 dumpsters in, empty, drive back the next morning. You know, there's only 1 or 2 people camping, but the whole thing's full. That's a challenge we're facing. And we write citations and fine people if we can track it back to who it is. But then again, who wants to go over there, dig through their trash, get some mail and try to find them? And then if you call the law and ask them to do it, like, they're busy. They're doing real work to keep us safe out there. They don't want to sift through our trash to find out who dumped it, and we get that. But I'm just letting folks know the trash is a problem. It's not just from the campers. It's not because the Corps doesn't have adequate trash pickup. Folks just come in and dump.
Abusing the system.
Yeah.
This one's about the E. coli from the park bathrooms getting flooded out and some of the lakes or reservoirs. How is it being addressed?
In a perfect world, when the reservoir's coming up, we'd have it pumped out. Some of those are also hooked up to sewer systems, but some of them are straight vault toilets and we may not be able to get to it. In a perfect world, we're gonna have it pumped out and cleaned out. If not, let's just all remember, think back to the solution to pollution is dilution. It's not I'm being a little bit funny, but it's also true. Enough water over time, the dilution takes care of itself. But a lot of those toilets are treated, so ideally we've had them pumped out prior to the high water. It may not happen, but...
So the goal is to pump them out before the water rises?
Yes.
Jeff says, Lake Ouachita is higher than I've seen it in 35 years during the 4th, I guess 4th of July. I've heard rumors because of automotive boat dealership owner having a sale asking to no water be generated. Don't know how true this is, but it's a popular rumor. As hard as it's been, I'm sure Entergy needs to generate.
Well, I'll just clear that up. It's a popular rumor. We don't operate Ouachita in the Little Rock district. Corps of Engineers districts are divided up by watersheds. That one's operated by the Vicksburg district on that Ouachita River basin there. But it's a flood risk reduction reservoir. It was a wet spring, folks. They're not holding it high just for
They're not
the boat
holding
companies.
it high for one person.
Right.
Morgan says, why close campgrounds around Beaver Lake at the end of September when fall is gorgeous and prime tent camping season?
We agree.
We want to know.
We want to know.
We want to know.
Because
We want to
when
know.
it cools off at Old Howard
Highway 25,
it shuts down. And
October,
I'm sure it's funded.
and we've been there until the last day. October 31st is when we checked out because it was beautiful weather. So yeah, we're curious.
Yeah, it could be winter staffing. Like I said, typically we bring on summer help and rec season help, and they're no longer on board to be able to do that. Looking at rec statistics over time, we realize we got to close down some loops and capacity. It's visitation numbers. When you guys drive in and you drive over those bean counters, visitation numbers tell us where we kind of need to be open and where we don't need to be. I feel you though. I mean, weather gets nice, and then no one's there Monday through Friday. But then they would only be there Saturday and Sunday. If we can't keep a park open when no one's going to be there for 5 days. And so it's all based off visitation numbers. So I hope that makes sense to you. I know you don't like it.
We need to recruit more people to do what we do and camp Monday through Friday in November. Barbara says, I'd like to know why the Corps of Engineers claim a portion of the land that's 300 feet above the lake on a rock bluff. They must know it's not going to flood, so why do you need to rule over the land?
The federal government bought to these felines and known elevations, and it wasn't perfect, but they were trying to impound these reservoirs quickly to get this flood control in there. So there are some places where it may not make sense.
Logical.
But we were buying to those known elevations. On a cliff like that, I'd perhaps understand it. But that's how they bought. And I can't rewind the clock and go back and see what they were doing at the time. But the lands were purchased to manage the reservoirs for those authorizing purposes: flood control, hydro, drinking water, environmental stewardship. And perhaps they were using imperfect survey techniques back then, and they swept up a bluff
that may
or
not
a
have been
cliff like
necessary.
that. But they got it, and now we've got it, and we're protecting it.
Kevin asks, newspaper article of 1943. Are the numbers listed for the lake levels just for the initial filling of the lake? The dam was designed for a minimum level of 510 with a maximum of 552. The numbers now sure are nowhere near this.
We're talking about Norfolk. I went and looked this up beforehand. He says the minimum is what?
510 to a maximum of 552.
Okay. Bottom of the power pool at Norfolk is what?
510.
510.
Okay.
So that news article is right.
This matches
Now,
what he's saying.
he says maximum pool is what?
552.
552 is he's talking about the power pool. And what is it now?
555. So we're within 3 feet of that.
So, remember earlier I talked about White River minimum flows? In order to change the water control plan a little bit to meet the minimum flow required for the trout downstream, they cut into the, they raised the conservation pool and cut into the flood pool. That's where they got that additional storage from. So it's changed by a few feet for the White River minimum flows legislation that was put into place. So it's changed since that really historical article that he brought up, and I'm glad he did, but the bottom of the power pool has not.
Okay, so 510 is still the bottom.
And now it's 555.75.
So we're 3 feet over the max at 552 to 555.
Right, and that's just because they raised the power pool, they went into the flood pool, they took storage out of the flood pool. Now look at Norfolk too. This year we had to surcharge a few times, which means water got to the top of the flood pool, and we had to open the gates a little bit. Had we had a couple of feet, had we had 3 feet, we might not had to have done that. So that's what happens when you change the water control plan. There was another question about that in there. There's always the haves and have-nots. Now, the trout have this water, this minimum flow, but now we don't have 3 feet for flood storage. So there's always the haves and have-nots when you change it. So when you talk about the White River Basin study and people want change, you're going to be taking from one or the other. One mission gets more, one mission gets less. Something important is we're thankful for bloggers and YouTubers like you guys, and there's others around the state that want to shed light on these issues and want to use these resources. And so I can't thank you guys enough for covering it. You start getting complaints or you start hearing things you're not sure are true, reach out anytime. We're not trying to hide. We're trying to do the best we can with what we're provided with.
Yeah.
And I will say this too, on Friday nights when our folks get off work, do you know where they're headed to?
The wreck sites.
The wreck sites. We don't manage and maintain these things not to use them ourselves. We've got boats. I floated the Buffalo. Now that's a National Park Service river, but we're all using these resources too, and we're just trying to figure out how to make them work with what we've got.
Thanks for the open communication. I like that nothing is being hidden. It's all being answered as honestly as it can be.
Hopefully you can convey that this was just, there was nothing I said I didn't want to talk about.
Right.
I mean, we're operating within our means and within the law that's been given us to the authority that we have. I do just want to remind everybody about the sirens below the dams. When they go off, it's time to start moving. You guys were with us the last time when the sirens went off. It was instantaneous. The water levels came up. It was a wall of water moving. Both generators online at the same time below Greer's Ferry can be somewhere around 8,000 cubic feet per second. So start moving. When you hear the sirens, start moving. We can't ask folks to heed that warning enough. And then just like here on the reservoir, you've got that downstream area in the little red. People have built closer and closer and closer to the river over time. I just want to put out there that it's not if, but when we're going to have to make a big release from Greer's Ferry. And the closer you keep building to that river, the more danger you are in. So just like we want to limit development up here, as much as possible, those private landowners downstream from here need to also limit development, because we've not had to surcharge from Greer's Ferry, meaning we haven't filled it all the way up and had to make those emergency releases. But the day's coming. We have all just seen 7 inches of rain in 2 hours in Texas. That's what was happening on the White River when we decided to build these dams. And so let's do our best to limit the development around the reservoirs and around those rivers, because they are going to fill up. We're not going to stop Mother Nature completely, but we can reduce the risk. But when you build closer and closer and closer, it gets impossible to eliminate that risk.
I want to say thank you, Jay, for coming out, spending time meeting us here to discuss and give information to everyone about the Corps' mission and what y'all are doing, and we appreciate your time.
Yeah, we thank you guys for helping us get the word out about what we're doing and how we're managing with the resources we have.
Thank you, and we'll get links to everything that he mentioned as far as resources online that y'all can look at to get that data.